Grace Whitman was only 11 years old when her small-town world unraveled. Thomas Reed was the loner everyone feared but didn't truly understand. And Harold Whitman, the estranged uncle, no one spoke about, was the name that turned a family tragedy into a story of betrayal. Their lives collided on one summer night in Ashwood. What followed would haunt America, as the night Innocence was stolen forever. Ashwood was the kind of place where people still waved at each other from across the street and neighbors left pies on each other's porches. It was a small Midwestern town that wore its simplicity like a badge of honor. Life moved slowly there. The local diner buzzed with the same conversations every morning. Children pedaled their bikes in circles until the sun set, and no one worried about the dangers that haunted bigger cities. It was a town that believed it was safe, untouched by the world's ugliness. For the people who lived there, danger was something they only saw on the evening news, never something that might cross their own doorstep. That belief shattered on the night of August 12, 2003. It began as a warm summer evening, the kind when the sky blushed orange before giving way to the quiet dark. Families had gathered on porches. Children's laughter carried from the park, and parents called them home for dinner. 11-year-old Grace Whitman was among them, riding her bicycle down the familiar path that led from the swings to her family's. How she had taken that same route countless times, and nothing about the evening suggested it would be any different. But by the time the clock struck 8, Grace had not returned. At first, her parents thought she had stopped at a friend's house. Then minutes stretched into an hour, and worry began to tighten its grip. The streets, once filled with chatter, seemed suddenly silent as the Whitmans called out for their daughter. Her bicycle was soon discovered, tipped against the edge of the road near a row of maple trees. It lay there like an abandoned clue, the handlebars twisted, the chain dangling loose. Grace herself was nowhere to be found. The sight of that lonely bike sent a current of fear through the family that spread quickly to the neighbors. Emergency calls flooded the police station shortly after. Officers rushed to the scene, headlights sweeping across the quiet neighborhood. As they searched for any sign of the missing girl, flashlights cut through the dark as volunteers began scouring backyards and ditches. The night that had started with such peace was now filled with anxious voices, calling Grace's name into the emptiness. Parents pulled their children inside, doors that usually remained unlocked were bolted shut, and whispers of fear threaded through the town. Ashwood, a place that prided itself on safety, had become a stage for something sinister. Police set up a command post at the park where Grace had last been seen. Every available officer was called in, and search dogs sniffed along the trail, following scents that faded into nothingness. The residents stood together in clusters, some clutching candles, others holding photos of the missing girl. Everyone wanted to believe she had simply wandered off and would soon be found, tired and embarrassed, with a story of adventure. But beneath those hopeful murmurs lingered the heavy silence of dread. As the hours dragged on, no answers came. The town's familiar landmarks, its quiet streets, its tree-lined yards, its welcoming homes suddenly seemed unfamiliar and menacing. What had always felt safe now felt like a trap. Each shadow looked darker, each rustling branch more suspicious. For the first time in living memory, Ashwood was gripped by fear. The disappearance of a child was something that happened elsewhere, not here. But now it was their reality. And no one could escape the truth. Innocence had been stolen from their town, and nothing would ever feel the same again. The search for Grace Whitman began with urgency and hope. But as hours turned into days, that hope slowly started to fade. Police officers, volunteers, and neighbors joined forces, combing through every corner of Ashwood. Fields were trampled by heavy boots, rivers churned as divers searched beneath the surface, and abandoned barns echoed with the sound of voices calling Grace's name. Posters bearing her picture were taped to street lamps and grocery store windows. The smiling face of a little girl, now a haunting reminder of what had been lost. Each day that passed without answers deepened the unease, and Ashwood began to realize this was not a case of a child simply wandering off. Something deliberate had happened. Investigators worked tirelessly, starting with the last known sighting of Grace. Witnesses recalled seeing her at the park, her bright blue bicycle circling the path before she headed home. Just minutes later, the bike was found abandoned. Officers began canvassing the area, knocking on doors, asking questions, looking for anything unusual. Most residents reported the same thing. It had been a quiet evening, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet one detail emerged that quickly drew attention. Several people remembered seeing a dark sedan near the park. It had circled the block more than once, moving slowly, as though the driver was watching. No one recognized the vehicle, and when detectives checked nearby traffic cameras, they confirmed its presence. The car had no visible license plate, and it vanished from view within minutes of Grace's disappearance. This discovery shifted the investigation. What had once seemed like a tragedy of circumstance was now being seen as something far more sinister. The missing license plate suggested preparation, not chance. Someone had come to Ashwood that evening with a plan. The realization spread through the community like wildfire, igniting fear in every household. Parents held their children tighter, eyes scanned passing cars with suspicion, and whispers of abduction became louder. Days later, a break came in the form of a small but chilling clue. Search teams found one of Grace's shoes near a drainage ditch at the edge of town. It was dirty and scuffed, lying half-hidden beneath weeds, but it was unmistakably hers. The discovery was both a relief and a heartbreak. It meant Grace had been there, yet it also confirmed she had been taken against her will. The shoe was collected as evidence, and the area was combed again and again, but no other trace was found. As pressure mounted, the police increased their presence. Roadblocks were set up on highways, and every vehicle resembling the mysterious sedan was pulled over and checked. Detectives reviewed hours of security footage from gas stations, convenience stores, and traffic intersections, searching for even a glimpse of the missing car. Still, the trail seemed to grow colder with each passing hour. Every unanswered question added to the weight pressing down on the community. Where was Grace? Who had taken her? And why had they chosen Ashwood? The Whitman family struggled in the public eye, standing at press conferences with trembling voices, pleading for their daughter's safe return. Behind closed doors, their home became a place of grief and silence. Strangers from nearby towns arrived to help, bringing food, candles, and prayers. But nothing could fill the absence that hung heavy in the Whitmans' lives. For the first time in decades, Ashwood's churches were filled to capacity. With families kneeling together, desperate for a miracle, despite the grim atmosphere, investigators refused to let the case slip into despair. They built a timeline of Grace's last moments, reconstructed her path, and tried to piece together the puzzle. Each clue seemed to point towards something planned, something calculated. The town could no longer cling to the illusion of safety. The discovery of the abandoned bicycle and the single shoe told a story no one wanted to hear. Grace had not simply vanished into the night. Someone had been waiting for her, and that someone had succeeded. As investigators dug deeper, the disappearance of Grace Whitman began to reveal layers no one in Ashwood had ever imagined. What started as a frantic search now shifted into a careful hunt for whoever had planned and carried out the crime. The early discovery of the suspicious sedan remained the strongest lead. But detectives knew a car alone would not solve the mystery. They needed to look at the people connected to Grace and her family, because sometimes the darkest truths were found closer to home than anyone wanted to admit. The first breakthrough came when detectives uncovered something the Whitmans had kept private. Weeks before Grace vanished, the family had received a series of disturbing letters. They were short, typed notes delivered through the mail without a return address. The words were vague but threatening, warning the family to protect what you love and to watch her closely before someone else does. At the time, they believed the letters were cruel pranks or the work of a troubled teenager. But now investigators were certain they were connected to Grace's disappearance. The timing was too precise, the wording too direct. Someone had been targeting the family. The discovery changed the tone of the investigation. Detectives began compiling a list of people with grudges against the Whitmans, no matter how small or distant. They interviewed coworkers, neighbors, and even estranged relatives. That was when the name Thomas Reed surfaced. Reed was a mechanic who lived in a rundown house on the outskirts of town. kept to himself, rarely spoke to anyone, and had a reputation for watching children at the park from the seat of his old pickup. Most people ignored him, dismissing him as a loner. But several neighbors recalled seeing a vehicle like the dark sedan parked near his property. Police moved quickly. They brought Reed in for questioning, and while he denied everything, his nervous demeanor only fueled suspicions. A search warrant for his home uncovered a disturbing collection of photographs hidden in a box beneath his bed. They were pictures of children from Ashwood, taken without their knowledge. Some were snapped at the park, others on the streets near the elementary school. Grace appeared in several of them. Photographs were chilling, proof that Reed had been watching her long before she vanished. The evidence was enough for an arrest. News of Reed's capture spread through the town, offering residents a fragile sense of relief. For a moment, it seemed the nightmare might be over. The idea that a loner had been responsible for the crime fit neatly into the fears that had consumed Ashwood. People wanted to believe the monster had been caught, that their children could once again play outside without fear. But beneath the surface, doubts began to form. Forensic teams carefully combed through Reed's property, searching for anything that tied him directly to Grace's disappearance. They found more unsettling items: scraps of clothing, dolls with missing limbs, and notes scribbled with strange phrases. Yet none of it proved that he had taken Grace. More importantly, when investigators ran DNA tests on evidence collected from Grace's abandoned bicycle, the results did not match Reed. It was a devastating blow to the case. The photographs made him look guilty. Science told a different story. The investigation took a darker turn as these contradictions surfaced. Was Reed a predator who had been preparing for a crime but hadn't yet committed it, or was he being used as a distraction from the real culprit? Detectives debated these questions in silence, careful not to let their doubts leak to the press. The town, however, began to fracture. Some believed Reed was guilty and that the DNA evidence was just a mistake. Others were convinced the police had arrested the wrong man. Ashwood was no longer united in grief. It was divided by suspicion. The letters, the photographs, and the unanswered questions painted a picture that was incomplete and terrifying. If Reed wasn't the man behind Grace's disappearance, then who was? Why had they been so careful, leaving behind almost nothing for investigators to follow? With each day that passed, the sense of control slipped further from the police. Grace was still missing, and the truth was more tangled than anyone had feared. While Thomas Reed sat behind bars, the investigation into Grace Whitman's disappearance continued to pull threads that led in directions no one had anticipated. The photographs in his possession were disturbing, and his reputation as a loner who lingered too long around children made him an easy target for blame. Yet the mismatch between the DNA evidence and Reed's profile cast a heavy shadow of doubt. Detectives knew that convicting the wrong man would not bring Grace home, and so they kept digging, determined to uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface of the case. The break they needed came quietly. Forensic experts had managed to recover partial DNA from the handlebars of Grace's bicycle, and when it was entered into the national database, a surprising name emerged. It was not Thomas Reed. The profile matched a man with a criminal record that stretched back decades, a man with a connection to the Whitman family itself. His name was Harold Whitman, Grace's estranged uncle. Harold had left Ashwood nearly 10 years earlier after serving time for burglary and assault. He had become a ghost in family conversations, a shadow they rarely acknowledged. Grace herself had never met him, and her parents had deliberately kept it that way. They believed he was trouble, incapable of change, and too dangerous to be around. Their children. The revelation that Harold's DNA had surfaced on Grace's bike shocked the family to the core. It wasn't the faceless predator the town had imagined. It was blood, someone tied to them by name and history. Detectives began retracing Harold's steps. Records showed he had returned to Ashwood only a week before Grace disappeared. He had rented a small room under a false name at a roadside motel, just outside of town. Staff remembered him as restless, pacing in and out at odd hours, rarely sleeping. Security cameras captured his movements near the park on the night Grace vanished. He blended into the crowd, Unnoticed by neighbors who had long forgotten his face, the discovery of his presence reopened every wound the family had tried to bury. Investigators learned that Harold had attempted to reach out to his brother, Grace's father, in the months before her disappearance. Letters were sent but never answered. Phone calls made but ignored. In them, Harold hinted at wanting to reconnect with the family, but the undertone of bitterness was clear. He felt abandoned, cast aside, unwanted. The threatening notes the Whitmans had received suddenly seemed less like anonymous warnings and more like the voice of a man consumed by resentment. When news of Harold's involvement spread, Wood erupted with anger and disbelief. Parents, who once demanded Reed's conviction now, turned their fury toward a man they had overlooked. The notion that a relative could be behind such a cruel act was almost too much to comprehend. For the Whitmans, the betrayal cut deeper than words could describe. They had feared strangers, watched their children's every step outside, and warned them about the dangers of unknown faces. They never imagined the danger would come from within their own bloodline. Police launched a manhunt for Harold. Motel room was searched, revealing maps of Ashwood with parks and playgrounds circled in red ink. Among his belongings were trinkets that seemed to belong to children, though investigators could not immediately connect them to Grace. Still, the pattern was undeniable. Harold had not simply returned to town on a whim. He had been watching, planning, and waiting. The town's unity, already fractured, collapsed further. Some still clung to the belief that Reed was involved, that perhaps both men had played a role in Grace's disappearance. Others focused solely on Harold, convinced that his bitter history and violent tendencies explained everything. The uncertainty tore at Ashwood, leaving neighbors suspicious of one another. Friendships strained, trust evaporating with each rumor that circulated. As days passed and Harold remained at large, fear deepened. Parents no longer let their children step outside without supervision. Streets that had once been filled with life were now silent, curtains drawn tight in every home. The idea that Grace's own uncle had returned with darkness in his heart changed the town forever. The story was no longer one of a child stolen by chance, but of family betrayal, of blood turning against blood. It was a truth so heavy that even before the case reached its conclusion, Ashwood knew it would never be the same. 2 weeks after Grace Whitman's disappearance, the search reached a breaking point. The community was exhausted, the volunteers drained, and the police under immense pressure to find answers. The case had already taken the town through cycles of hope and despair. From the arrest of Thomas Reed to the shocking revelation about Harold Whitman, what remained was silence and unbearable absence where a child's laughter had once been. The silence was broken on a damp Thursday morning when a farmer walking his land just outside Ashwood stumbled upon something he would never forget. Inside, an abandoned farmhouse, hidden behind warped wooden boards and dust thick from years of neglect, lay the body of Grace. The discovery confirmed the worst fears. The farmhouse was isolated, surrounded by fields that swallowed sound, the perfect place for someone to hide a crime. Investigators descended on the scene, documenting every inch of the rotting structure. Grace's belongings were scattered across the floor, her backpack, sweater she had worn to the park, and small items from her home that could only have been taken by someone close to her. The walls bore no messages, no signs of struggle, just the eerie emptiness of a place where innocence had been extinguished. It was not chaos that defined the space, but deliberate control. A chilling reminder that the crime had been planned with precision. Fingerprints, lifted from the farmhouse, matched Harold Whitman. His presence was undeniable, stamped into the evidence. With brutal clarity, the crime scene told a story of betrayal that Ashwood was unprepared to face. A family member had taken Grace not out of impulse, but from a calculated bitterness that had festered for years. The letters, the circling car, the maps in his motel room, all the threads tied together in that farmhouse. The monster they had been searching for had been hiding in plain sight, carrying their family name. Law enforcement launched a massive operation to capture Harold before he could vanish again. Roadblocks stretched across county lines, highways were monitored, and his photo was plastered on every television screen. Despite the efforts, Harold managed to slip away for several days, moving under the cover of night, avoiding detection. He was finally caught when a highway patrol officer in the neighboring state of Indiana noticed a nervous man in a rest stop bathroom. His attempt to change his appearance had failed. The scars on his face and the cold look in his eyes gave him away. He was arrested without resistance. His flight coming to a quiet end. The trial that followed revealed more than anyone wanted to know. Testimony painted Harold as a man consumed by envy, convinced his family had abandoned him and stolen the life he believed he deserved. In his twisted reasoning, targeting Grace was a way to inflict pain, to reclaim power over the people he resented. Most the court heard about his violent past, his obsessions, and the calculated way he had returned to Ashwood. For the community, the details were unbearable, yet they needed to hear them. They needed the truth, even if it broke them. When the guilty verdict was finally read, there was no celebration, only quiet grief. Justice had been served, but the price was too high. The Whitmans were left shattered, their home now filled with silence that no verdict could erase. Neighbors who once gathered on porches now locked their doors at night, glancing out windows with unease. Parents who once trusted the town to raise their children together now kept them close, shadows of fear never far away. Ashwood's identity, as a safe haven, had been destroyed. The night Grace vanished had marked the end of innocence for the town. The realization that danger had come not from a stranger, but from within their own bloodline, changed everything. Ashwood was no longer the place it once was. It became a symbol of betrayal and vulnerability, a reminder that evil could wear a familiar face. On that summer night in 2003, when Grace's bicycle was left abandoned by the trees, the world had shifted. In Ashwood, the trust that once bound neighbors together was replaced by locks, alarms, and unspoken grief. The story of Grace Whitman became more than just a crime. It became a cautionary tale, remembered by all, as the night innocence died in America.